Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, A Life Without Parole. Today we're going to be talking about quite possibly the most disturbing case I have ever covered. It ranks up there with the Lori Vallow case since it too involves the death of children. But this case is about a neonatal nurse who is now a convicted serial killer. Lucy Letby is a British nurse who was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 6 others. The case began in 2015 when a number of babies in the neonatal unit in the Countess of Chester Hospital began to die suddenly and unexpectedly. At first, the deaths were thought to be natural. It was a hospital after all, and unfortunately, not all babies live no matter what kind of care they receive. But there seemed to be an unusual amount of deaths, especially with babies who seemed to be doing just fine. And the common denominator was Miss Letby. Doctors and nurses began to suspect that something more sinister had to be going on. But figuring out what it was and proving it was a very long and hard process. The last thing to come to mind was that a young nurse was causing all the mayhem. Who would even think that? An investigation was launched, but the investigation was stopped in its tracks early on because of hospital administration blocking it. Charges against the hospital may be coming at a future date. Miss Letby, who was a nurse in the neonatal unit at the time of all the deaths, was eventually arrested and charged with 7 murders and 6 attempted murders. This is a short video showing when she got arrested.
Hello, Lucy, is it? Yes. Hello, my name's Chester, please. Locate Stefan, 2 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Have you seen anybody else? Tom, can you say the John to right? Yeah, Stu, not a problem.
Yeah. I'm going to put you in the back seat over here.
Hold on, man.
Yes.
Get the seat up.
Okay, just take a seat in there for me, Lucy. I'll move that seat forward a bit shortly.
Yeah, I've just had knee surgery. So
Oh, right, okay.
they told me that there would be a lot more deaths and that I've been linked to somebody that was there for a lot of them.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we don't just notice as a team in general.
Have you ever had a situation that seemed like there certainly was no foul play, but your gut was telling you there was something amiss, and then you later found out that the person you suspected was in fact bad? I remember I had a friend whose dad gave me the creeps. I always steered clear of him. I found out years later he was a child molester and he got put in prison. Comment below if you ever had a gut feeling about someone that you later found out to be a sound reason. In the case of the nurse, there were many incidences where things didn't seem right. Things just didn't add up. But the whistleblowers were not taken seriously. Now, years later, they have regrets for not being more aggressive in their approach to finding the truth. They have even suggested that they should have gone immediately to the police rather than the hospital administration. Now, hindsight is 20/20. We can't all get it right 100% of the time. And many times we only have a small piece of the puzzle of a very large picture. When put together, it seems obvious, but one puzzle piece in and of itself doesn't seem like enough to report. The evidence against Ms. Letby was largely circumstantial, but it was very strong when it all came together. A search of her home and her parents' home did reveal some very incriminating evidence. And this ended up being a very complex case. It's stunning that Miss Letby didn't get rid of all the evidence. She knew she was being investigated, but she was not a clean or organized person based on the pictures that we see that were taken from her home. Her ramblings on post-it notes that her mind was bouncing all over the place. Like she was proud of her work, then sometimes she felt remorseful, guilt, shame, and at times, according to these little post-it notes of her little journal entries, she was even suicidal. When you think about the psychology of serial killers, you realize they all tend to have a lot of common factors. Serial killers are defined as individuals who have killed two or more people in separate events with a cooling off period between each murder. They are often motivated by a need for power, control, or attention, and they may derive pleasure from the act of killing. This just blows my mind. The psychology of serial killers is complex, and there is no single explanation for why they commit their crimes. In Ms. Letby's case, there has been speculation that she had a deep crush on a doctor who happened to be married. She was in some sort of a relationship with him, and it has been suggested that she loved the attention she received from him when they worked together to save a baby's life. Let's go ahead and watch a portion of the statement read by the judge before he pronounced Ms. Letby's sentence for her crimes.
Your fellow neonatal nurses spoke very highly of you, and several of them became your close friends. Having started as a Band 5 nurse at the Countess of Chester in 2012, you became a mentor to student nurses, and in the spring of 2015, gained the qualification that enabled you to care for the sickest babies on the unit, or those requiring the most intensive care. You relished being in the intensive care nursery. Your messages to colleagues revealed an interest in babies that were on or were coming to the unit who had uncommon medical conditions. The methods you employed to carry out your murderous intent were only revealed by the later detailed investigation into the events of and surrounding the collapses and deaths of the babies, which commenced in 2018. There was premeditation, calculation, and cunning in your actions. You specifically targeted twins, and latterly triplets. Some babies were healthy. Others had medical issues of which you were aware. The great majority of your victims suffered acute pain as a result of what you did to them. They all fought for survival. Some, sadly, struggled in vain and died. You used a number of different ways to try to kill them, thereby misleading clinicians into believing the collapses had or might have had a natural cause, or were a consequence of a developing medical condition. You took opportunities to harm babies when staff were in breaks or away from babies. On some occasions, you falsified records to indicate there were signs of a deterioration before a collapse occurred. You knew that the last thing anyone working in the unit would or did think was that someone caring for the babies was deliberately harming them. As the number of unexpected and unexplained collapses and deaths escalated, senior doctors started to think the unthinkable and consider the possibility that someone was, in fact, deliberately harming the babies, and you were identified as the common factor. You had a detached enthusiasm for the resuscitations and what followed. You endeavoured to impress colleagues and clinicians and sought reassurance from them as to your competence and skills, and would message others to the effect that no one was at fault. On occasions, you cruelly and callously made inappropriate remarks to some of the grieving parents at the time of or in the immediate aftermath of a death. When the homes of both you and your parents were searched, confidential documents relating to babies, including handover and resuscitation sheets and notes and blood gas readings, were found, and there were entries in a diary recording relevant events. Handover sheets relating to all but the first 4 of the babies had been taken from the unit and kept by you. I am satisfied you started to keep these documents after those initial offences in June 2015 as morbid records of the dreadful events surrounding the collapses of your victims and what you had done to them. You had a fascination with the babies and their families, which extended to making repeated searches on Facebook for their parents, sometimes immediately following the events, and on occasions much later. A piece of paper with dent writing on both sides, setting out your thoughts and feelings, was found in the first search of your home in 2018. Amongst the phrases you wrote were, "The world is better off without me," and "I am evil, I did this." The impact of your crimes has been immense, as disclosed by the deeply moving personal statements that have been read to the court this morning. The lives of newborn or relatively newborn babies were ended almost as soon as they began, and lifelong harm has been caused, all in horrific circumstances. Loving parents have been robbed of their cherished children, and others have to live with the physical and mental consequences of your actions. Siblings have been deprived of brothers and sisters. You have caused deep psychological trauma, brought enduring grief and feelings of guilt, caused strains in relationships, and disruption to the lives of all the families of all your victims. It is no part of my function to reach conclusions as to the underlying reason or reasons for your actions, nor could I, for they are known only to you. I must pass appropriate sentences according to law, addressing the seriousness of your offences, the facts of which I now describe briefly.
As the judge stated, we will never know the exact reason for Ms. Letby's murders, since she's still claiming innocence. But based on the other serial killers and the psychology behind serial killers, we can speculate. There are usually some common themes that emerge from the study of their psychology. These themes include a lack of empathy, a need for control, a thrill-seeking nature, among other things. Serial killers are often very intelligent and charming, which apparently she is. They may be able to easily manipulate others, including their victims. Imagine a newborn intensive care baby. This certainly fits into the evidence surrounding the case of the killer nurse, Miss Letby. The medical records of the victims eventually became key evidence in the case, and the testimony of witnesses suggested that Miss Letby had been the only nurse on duty when all the deaths occurred. The police investigation also found evidence that she had incriminating online searches. On Monday, August 21st, today, Ms. Letby was found guilty and sentenced to whole life jail term. In the United States, this sentence would be equivalent to a life without parole. Lucy Letby is one of only 3 women alive to have been given such a term in the UK. She was sentenced at Manchester Crown Court. Based on this sentence, Miss Letby, the former nurse, will never be released from prison. Well, most likely will never be released. Just like how there are some cases in the United States where prisoners with life without parole sentences eventually get out on some technicality or change of law, etc. But as her sentence stands right now, she will never be released from prison. The judge sentenced her to a rare whole life term for the sadistic murder of 7 babies. Lucy Letby refused to be present in court for the sentencing, in which parents of her victims described in powerful detail the impact of her crimes. It's now being suggested that the law in the UK needs to be changed so that criminals don't get to choose whether or not they're present. In the United States, we do have this law. It's one that many victims feel is justified since it helps to give them closure to be able to look the criminal in the eye while they give a victim impact statement. The judge did order Ms. Letby to be provided with a copy of the sentencing remarks and of the victim impact statements since she refused to be in the courtroom. But based on her signs of narcissistic behavior, in my opinion, my guess is she'll never read them, unless she does it for her own sadistic pleasure, certainly not as a sign of remorse. In one statement, the mother of a baby that was murdered, known as Child C, said she felt it was like watching someone else's life as her son died. Holding back tears in court, she said, "The trauma of us all will live with us until we die." Learning that his killer was watching us as we grieved is like something out of a horror story. I personally feel like this is a level of evil that ranks up with the worst I have ever heard of. Whole life orders are reserved for crimes of exceptional gravity. The other 2 women in the UK serving whole life terms are Rose West, who tortured and killed at least 9 young women in the 70s and 80s, and Joanna Deney, who murdered 3 men in what came to be known as Peterborough Ditch murders in 2013. Look at this young lady. This just goes to show that evil can come in all packages. We might think that we know what a serial killer would look like if we saw one, but you just really never know. This is a very sad and disturbing story, and it's important to remember that these crimes are incredibly rare. The vast majority of nurses are dedicated and caring professionals who would never harm a child. I think about the one mother who had her child moved to another hospital because she felt like her child's care would be better served elsewhere. I remember when my son was young, he had a medical emergency that mirrored a minor asthma symptom. I won't go into details about this, but I didn't feel good about the diagnosis. There was something in my gut telling me that there was more to this story. I told my pediatrician, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, no matter how much medical knowledge I have, I will never look past the gut instincts of a mother. He ran further tests based solely on my worries and found an undetected medical emergency that certainly could have eventually caused the death of my son. A surgery was performed and my son's life was saved. I want to talk about the importance of trusting your gut instincts and speaking up if you see something that just doesn't seem right. I'm not just talking about medical emergencies, but injustices in general. The most important thing is to be willing to report if you see or feel like something is amiss. If the person you're reporting to doesn't take you serious, but that feeling is just still nagging, find someone else to report to. If you see injustice, don't be afraid to keep reporting. The more people who speak up, the more likely it is that the injustice will be addressed. As a true crime community, we can learn and empower ourselves to cases in the world and learn what to look out for. Who knows, someone who is watching this video today might be a whistleblower to help someone in need. We may never know the true power of one person to make a difference. Let's make the world a better place wherever we can. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you again soon. See ya.